Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our briefing on No First Use. My name is Yasmin Silva. I am the Partnerships Manager with Beyond the Bomb. We are a grassroots organization working to prevent nuclear war. And I'm joined today in my presentation with Samantha Blake from WAND. I'd love to turn it over to her to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. As Yasmin said, my name is Samantha, and I'm the program manager for the Women Legislators Lobby, which is a program of WAND. WAND works to build women's political power to advocate for security and peace with justice. And WILL is a nonpartisan network of state legislators, which is a program of WAND that works together to influence federal policy and budget priorities.
So together, we are the co-chairs of the United Against Nuclear War Coalition, a group, as it sounds, working to prevent nuclear war. We are comprised of Beyond the Bomb, WAND, Rethink Media, Win Without War, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Union of Concerned Scientists, Peace Action, and Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. Today, we're going to walk you through what No First Use is as a policy, starting with a little bit of history around US nuclear policy, moving into the tensions and flashpoints that we see today, and then finally walking through No First Use and how it's a solution to counter the tensions that we see. So starting off with a history of US nuclear policy. At the height of the Cold War, in the world, there existed about 60,000 nuclear weapons, and these were between the United States and the Soviet Union. I want to take some time to focus specifically on some landmark treaties that have helped ease tensions and helped bring that number down from the height of the Cold War to the numbers we see today. So in 1968, the United States signed on to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT. It was negotiated between the United States and 4 other nuclear states, and it legally commits those countries to the elimination of nuclear weapons, and all other countries are prohibited from having nuclear weapons. However, with the NPT, there was no timeline for getting the count down to 0 nuclear weapons. In 1970, the NPT entered into force. In 1987, Gorbachev and Reagan came close to eliminating nuclear weapons, but instead negotiated the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. This is a treaty that prohibited both countries from creating or utilizing intermediate range missiles, which generally affects Europe the most. Next, in 1991, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START Treaty, was negotiated, and that limited the number of nuclear warheads a signatory could deploy and created verification systems for both the United States and Russia to ensure compliance. After its implementation, START successfully reduced strategic nuclear weapons that were then in existence by about 80%. So, since the height of the Cold War and with the implementation of these treaties, we've moved down to about 14,000 nuclear weapons worldwide. The vast majority still reside with the United States and Russia. It's really set a precedent that every president since Ronald Reagan has worked hand in hand with Russia to reduce nuclear stockpiles, that is, except the current administration. It also shows that the United States has a history of working to reduce the risk of nuclear exchange through treaties. So I want to talk a little bit about where we are right now. The map that you see on the right is a breakdown of all of the nuclear armed countries, as well as an estimate from about a year ago of how many warheads each country holds. As you can see, it is Russia and the United States who hold the largest stockpiles. So right now, there are a few nuclear tensions and flashpoints that impact the United States directly. and I'd like to run through them briefly. So to start, the United States and Russia, obviously the two largest nuclear weapons holders. Nuclear tensions have been steadily increasing between the United States and Russia. The most notable things are in regards to two of the treaties that I mentioned before, the INF Treaty and New START. So with the INF Treaty, Pompeo recently announced that the United States will withdraw from this treaty in 60 days unless Russia comes into compliance. This affects us because it has escalated tensions with our NATO allies, and they are rightfully worried as the range for the weapons dealt with in the INF Treaty impact mostly Europe. New START is, again, the arms control that limited the number of deployed warheads, is set to expire in 2021. The administration has not yet signed on to an extension. And so if this treaty is allowed to expire, there will no longer be limits on arsenals. And most importantly, there will no longer be verification mechanisms. This would mean that both countries, the United States and Russia, are in the dark. And realistically, that the United States would have no clue how Russia is running their nuclear weapons program or how many warheads they now have. Another flashpoint that has luckily simmered down a little bit is between the United States and North Korea. Earlier this year, and especially last year, tensions were extremely high. But since coming to the table with the United States, no progress has been made, and certainly no commitments. We really must open the door for more dialogue, because the longer we let this simmer, there are more tensions with our Asian allies. For if war were to break out, they would probably be the first targets. Finally, a flashpoint that is not yet nuclear, but is creating more tension between us and our allies, is the US and Iran. So Iran has remained compliant with the JCPOA, but when the United States withdrew, it created tension with the other brokers, namely France, Germany, the EU, and the UK. The other two additional signers are China and Russia, who obviously there are some additional simmering tensions there. And rightly so that our EU and European allies are worried about us having withdrawn from this treaty, because in addition, if we withdraw from the INF, it creates more tensions that they're stuck in the middle. So we need to do something to both dissipate these tensions, decrease the likelihood of a nuclear exchange. We need something that shows good faith to our allies and opens the door for diplomatic dialogue. And so we propose no first use. So what is no first use? No first use refers to a policy wherein a nuclear weapons country declares it will never be the first to use nuclear weapons. Of the 9 nuclear weapons powers, only 2, China and India, have declared a no first use policy. The other 7 reserve the option to use nuclear weapons first in a conflict. Currently, US policy says it will not use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear country in compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But it would consider nuclear use in, quote, extreme circumstances to defend the vital interests of the United States or its allies and partners. So what that means is that it leaves the door open for a nuclear first strike in response to everything from conventional, chemical, or biological attack. The first use policy was initially designed to deter conflict at a time when the United States and its European allies were frankly hard-pressed to match the Soviet Union's conventional capabilities, but that is certainly no longer true today. So why should we adopt a no first use policy? Nuclear weapons are dangerous and outdated relics of the Cold War. that have no relevance in combating current day threats, namely cyber warfare or terrorism from non-state actors. There is also no plausible circumstance in which the current option of a nuclear first use would be the national security interest of the United States or its allies. Any use of nuclear weapons, whether it's 1 or 1,000, would serve only to destroy. It could kill thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of civilians, and could damage the environment for over a decade. Additionally, nuclear first use would also cause unparalleled damage to the United States and heavy civilian life here at home by nuclear forces launched in retaliation. It could also risk international political isolation, something that we're already seeing with regards to how the United States is treating the treaties we are currently in. Advances in US conventional forces are right now more than enough to retaliate against realistic threats to national security, both those launched by state actors and non-state actors. As such, US national strategy should reflect that. No first use also provides a dramatic first step in making nuclear weapons irrelevant, both in the United States national security policy and on the international stage. Additionally, it would serve as a catalyst, establishing a global no first use norm and reinforcing the principle that nuclear wars can never be won and must never be fought. Something that President Obama and Vice President Biden had decided at the end of their term was that the United States should, in fact, adopt a no first use policy. However, given that it was so late in their term, they decided that they did not have time to work on it with allies, and so decided to not do it then. But this goes to show that this is not the first time that this is on the table for the United States. Essentially, the United States should embrace bold action in declaring a no first use nuclear policy. We have a special responsibility of leadership on this issue, being the only nation to ever use nuclear weapons in war. It is also vital that world leaders come together to build a global norm of no first use. This common sense measure would reduce the risk of nuclear war and make it less likely that nuclear weapons would be used, either by accident or miscalculation. Nuclear weapons have only been used once in human history, and through a no first use norm, we can make sure that this never happens again. So, momentum is growing on this, and I would love to turn it over to Sam to talk about how people and states are taking this into their own hands.
Great, thank you so much, Yasmin. So WAND, Will, and their partners have been working over the past year in introducing resolutions on both the local and state level, putting checks on our ability to use nuclear weapons. This began with more local actions, as you can see, in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Santa Fe, Durham, Baltimore, Northampton, and a very continuous list of states and counties and cities. And then last year, there was 10 resolutions introduced in 8 states in the state legislature. So these resolutions were born from the local work being done in these towns and cities, as well as women state legislators taking the initiative to protect their communities from this once existential harm that now seems to be growing more and more real every day. So we introduced in states California, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Georgia. And on August 29th of this year, California passed AJR 30, which passed both the Assembly and the Senate. And it was the first time that a resolution had passed on the state level, checking the president's authority to launch a nuclear first strike. In total, over 100 state legislators last year acted in support of nuclear checks and balances. We are continuing and growing this work in 2019 with resolutions being pre-filed on the state level. So we really are growing in momentum, showing no sign of stopping. And a good thing to note is that all these resolutions were introduced by women and also by women of color. I think 50% of the resolutions were introduced by women of color. So this movement is women-led. And I think that's a really important thing to note, that women are acting on this issue. They are concerned. And when women are concerned, their families are concerned, and their communities are concerned. Yeah, and we have many other states currently in the works for 2019, and we'd be more than happy to keep you updated as those get introduced and work their way through the legislature. So thanks, Yasmin, and I'll pass it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. So you've seen how folks are taking this into their own hands at the state and local level, but how can you and your office support No First Use? So the first step, I would say, is co-sponsoring a No First Use bill. Last session, Adam Smith introduced such a bill, and we're currently in talks to see who will introduce this coming session. So if you are interested, please reach out. We'll have included our contact information at the end of this presentation, and we would be happy to walk you through what that looks like and where we're at. Next is stepping up and supporting that state and local work happening within your state, and being a vocal advocate. Most people do not realize that Congress can actually step up and help on this issue. And as a former organizer on the ground, I can tell you that most of the conversations I had with people were, what do you mean we don't have this already? And they believed truly that it was a common sense piece of legislation that the United States had already adopted. No First Use is viewed as one of the most viable policy solutions to concerns over sole authority. A recent study done by David Binder Research and Rethink Media showed that 56% of the public supports banning the use of nuclear weapons unless the United States has been attacked. So this is popular, and it's only growing in momentum as more folks get educated. And so you spreading the word and supporting can only make this issue bigger and our goal more realistic. So we, as I said, we'll give you the tools. We can connect you, the United Against Nuclear War Coalition can connect you with experts in the field. We have connections with senior congressional champions, and we would be available for your office to consult with to make sure that you have the backing you need to move forward on No First Use. So obviously the question, as a legislator, you're concerned about many things, as your constituents are. And so I want to talk a little bit about how nuclear weapons and the first use of nuclear weapons connects to other issues that your constituents may care about. So the creation and maintenance of nuclear weapons obviously touches on a lot of other sectors. And so, as some of you may be aware, the United States is slotted to spend almost $2 trillion on modernizing our nuclear arsenal. And President Trump has also called for the creation of more usable nukes. If we're able to pass a no first use policy, it would deprioritize the use of nukes within our national security, which would make this spending less necessary. So not only do those things have steep price tags for taxpayers, but both projects require more nuclear material. If you see the map on your right, that is a map from ProPublica that actually shows all of the contaminated and Superfund sites in the United States. So this issue not only has cost us in the creation of these weapons, but billions of dollars in cleanup, in the cost of healthcare for our citizens. Cancer rates increase around Superfund sites and mining and storage facilities. But also our environment suffers as a result. So by taking offensive nuclear strikes off the table, we would free up resources to help remediate these environmental and public health impacts and ensure that they do not happen again. So the list on the left, excuse me, the environment, economy, healthcare, militarism, we are happy to go more in depth with you in your office to talk about the intersections of nuclear weapons with each of these, and we'd be happy to set up an appointment to talk. And so finally, wanted to see if there were any questions from those out there watching. I've also included both my and Samantha's contact information. And we had a question pre-submitted from someone who was unable to make the webinar today. And their question was, will adopting no first use leave the US more open for an attack? So my answer to this question is no. And the reason being is that the status quo is intact in that an aggressor knows that they would immediately be met with the full force of the US nuclear arsenal were they to attack. However, not adopting no first use makes it more likely for a misunderstanding at a nuclear flashpoint and false information to prompt an attack. And this almost happened a few times during the Cold War. So no first use would make sure that people know that it is not an incoming attack from the United States and in fact makes us safer. I'm going to see if there are any other questions submitted. Okay, so as you have both of our contact information, I want to thank you again for tuning in and reiterate that we are here to answer any questions you have and work with your office so that we can make our communities safer. Thank you so much for tuning in.